In today's video, I'm bringing you a very special guest, Eric Seidel. For those who don't know him, he was one of the co-founders of Flutter. He led the development team at Google, and I think it's fair to say that Flutter is what it is today thanks to him and his team. In this interview, we will talk about his new company, Shorebird, and how it's helping hundreds of developers improve their release cycle. Of course, we will also talk about Flutter, its future, its early days at Google, and much, much more. I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. So, Eric, thank you very much for being here. To start, could you tell us who you are and what have you done in the world of Flutter?
Yes, so my name is Eric Seidel. I've been with the Flutter project a long time. I helped start the project. I co-founded the project a little over 10 years ago. Flutter was a spin-off of the Chrome team, and we started trying to solve multi-platform development in a different way. And yeah, I've been with the team since inception. I led the team as the engineering director, and I led Dart along the way as well until I left Google about 2 years ago and started another company, now also around Flutter.
Okay, and what is this company? What do you do?
So this company is called Shorebird, and we're trying to fill in all the gaps in Flutter development that are not filled or that I wasn't able to fill from within Google. And so the first gap that we've started with is we've built an over-the-air update solution, code push, as some call it, for Flutter. This is the way that really all the largest apps on your phone already work. Certainly the way that WebView works is that instead of waiting for all of your users to click an update button, we have built a solution whereby which you can just push an update and it immediately goes to all of your users all around the globe, just like all the big apps work.
Okay, so does it mean that um, if I integrate your tool, I can just forget about Apple and Google forever? Just get rid of that hassle. Is it that good or?
To an extent, certainly you can from a technical perspective. I think there's a couple caveats with that. One of which is that you want your new users to have an excellent first install experience. And since we don't change the Play Store or App Store directly for you, you still want to submit to them, at least on some frequency, so all your new users get the latest code without having to waiting for an update, or being on network, etc. The other reason is that these stores both do have clauses in their agreement that are not about technical restrictions, but are about policy restrictions, about not deceiving users. Essentially, they don't want you to ship one app and then give them a completely different app. And so anytime
Mm,
you're making major changes to the apps, the stores do want to see them.
okay, so for instance, let's say that I have an app that some parts are really, really time sensitive, very important, and the idea will be to use code patch on those parts to have updates very quickly,
Yeah, so one
while
of the
other
neat
parts are not so important to. So I mean, some other sections I can use normal deploys.
So one of the neat things about our technology is that you don't have to make that choice up front. Some code push technologies you do have to choose. Like, say you used a web view, right? You wrote some of your app in a web view because you knew you might be changing that part of your app a lot. That sort of choice doesn't exist for Shorebird. With Shorebird, we can replace your entire app. So we can replace any Dart code that you've written. And it's designed that way because, in my experience, I'm not that good at predicting where I'm going to write bugs or where bugs are going to show up in my shipping software. And so we thought it was important to write a solution where it was you didn't have to make that choice up front. And so with Shorebird, you just replace a single line in your CI, or you can do it manually from your machine, but you replace the single build instruction, the Flutter build, with our Shorebird release, and that's it. You're done. You're now using Shorebird, and you now have the ability to later do a Shorebird patch to replace as much of the Dart code in that app as you need.
Okay, so I can decide if I use Shorebird or I do a regular release, right?
Correct. So most folks who use us just turn on Shorebird, and they do all of their releases with Shorebird in terms of all of their releases to the stores, and then whether they can then decide whether they're going to make a patch release, via Shorebird or via a full submission to the store separately, which I think is what you were asking.
Yeah, exactly. And from the point of view of the store, is that okay for them to do that kind of thing without doing a regular release?
Yeah, so the stores all explicitly allow this behavior, which is why all of the largest apps do this way. So, for example, when you launch YouTube, you see a little progress bar, or TikTok or Facebook. They all work very similarly. You see a little progress bar, and that's the app updating itself. It's pulling down new code. You'll see this too with games, right? When you launch a game, it'll say, I'm pulling down the latest Lua, for this level or whatever. So the stores explicitly allow this behavior, but they do have technical restrictions around it. The biggest one is that it has to be run inside an interpreter. And since Dart didn't have an interpreter, we had to build one. So we have spent the last 2 years building a modified Dart compiler, a modified Dart runtime that is able to comply with the store's requirements for running new code in an interpreter, which is exactly what we do. And it was quite complex, more complex than I had imagined it to be.
Yeah, it sounds difficult.
But now it works great.
Good, good. And okay, let's say that I'm a developer. I have integrated Shorebird. I want to use it. So what, from the perspective of a developer, what are the steps I need to do? You have some kind of command line tool, or what is the process of creating a patch and deploying it?
Yep. So again, Shorebird was designed to be minimal amount of setup, minimal amount of disruption. For example, it takes about 5 minutes to set up Shorebird in your app, regardless of the size of your app, whether it's your little hobby app or a giant many million corporate app, many million line corporate app, right? So all you have to run is Shorebird init, which just creates a line in our database that says your app exists and we know how to update it. And then the change you make is typically done in CI, typically done in your continuous integration, which is that you replace your Flutter build command. So typically when you make a build for the stores, you type Flutter build IPA or Flutter build AAB, right? So all you do is replace that command in Fastlane or CodeMagic or whatever you're using as part of your release flow with Shorebird release iOS or Shorebird release Android. And we, under the covers, call Flutter build for you. We just also do the bookkeeping of keeping track of this release and this patch, and it's supposed to go to these devices, all that sort of stuff for you. So we're just a wrapper around Flutter build from your perspective.
When this pipeline launches, the release is basically done, pushed in some way, and the end user is going to receive that code when they open the app, or what are they going to see after that?
Yeah. So here there's more setup that you can do if you want. By default, we operate silently in the background. So mobile operating systems kill apps all the time, right? You switch away from your phone and you go to your Gmail or whatever. We take advantage of that and run our update check code every time the app comes up, every time it launches, right? Which often it's launching even when you switched away for 30 minutes or whatever. And so by default, we'll just silently update at launch. Some customers of ours, particularly games, want to show a dialogue. They want to say, hey, you're not on the latest version, click a button and update. And so they can control that. We provide a full API access to the updating services, and you can control what dialogue you show, and hey, you need to move to this version, here, click this button, it'll restart the app. But the crux of it is that we swap out all of your Dart code during the start of your app. So we have to run during the start of an app, and often, again, that's coming just back from your recently used apps, but sometimes people do that restart explicitly in front of the user.
I see. And you said games, so is games a very important part of your clients, or how do you think?
It's been really interesting to watch what customers really like us. It's been several different segments. So to speak to games, for example, the games that use us really care about fairness. They tend to be competitive games. They care that all of their users are using the same code. We see some of that also from marketplaces. Say if you're like a reseller, or like you're a bidding marketplace for like a gig economy kind of thing. We have some marketplace apps where they care a lot that all of their merchants are on a level playing field. But we also see usage from other segments. So, for example, apps that make a lot of money or deal with money, we have several of those, or a whole bunch actually, who have come to Shorebird because for them, if their app is down for a minute, that means they're losing money, right? And so it's very important for them to be able to fix issues with Shorebird. Another segment that has really enjoyed Shorebird are white label apps. So you might know that like your local bank, for example, probably didn't write their own app. They went to a white label company and got the generic local bank app just reskinned for them, or your local gym, etc. And so we work with a whole bunch of those companies where their burden, interestingly enough, is all about shipping to the app stores, because they have to ship 1,000 apps or 10,000 apps. And we make it so that they only have to pay that we're going to update everyone in the app store cost once a quarter or once a month rather than once a week.
Okay, so they're able to make this process automatic for them to avoid
Correct.
having to do hundreds of deploys each day. And
Correct.
your clients use that technology for bug fixing, or they also push new features, brand new features, or what is the most common use case?
We see both. So the technology doesn't care. It'll replace whatever dark code you like. Again, this is where the stores might care, and that's for the individual customer that they need to manage their relationship with the store. We've had no trouble across many thousands of customers with any of the stores, but the stores do typically say that if you're making major changes to your app, that they would like to see it. But I think for run of the mill, I'm just adding a little screen or I'm adding a feature. People do that all the time with Shorebird. So, for example, we work with some startups, and they wanted to ship 12 times a day, right? Every hour,
Oh,
right? And so they use
sounds
Shorebird for that.
crazy.
Well, I think it just depends on how you have your team set up, right? And for some people where their app is still growing a lot, or they don't know, what segment of the users. Another customer segment that we've seen a lot is people who have temporal sensitivity, right? We have some apps that we work with where they have one day of the year, which is like where they make 80% of their revenue or something like that, right? And so they care a lot about that, right? Or something seasonal like a touring company or whatever. But anyways, we see a lot of these where there are different sensitivities where just the blanket you will submit to the store. Some many weeks later, your users might get it. Just isn't sufficient for their business needs.
I see. Well, for me, it sounds very crazy because I'm very used to deploy apps in the regular way. So I have this mindset of mobile developer mindset of doing one release per week, and that's a good that's a good tempo, I think. So I guess when your clients use that technology, they have or they're able to change their mind and their way their life cycle of developments and everything, I guess.
Yeah. Another thing that people really like about it is that, unlike the stores, we offer revert. We offer rollback.
Oh,
So
it's a big
if you
one,
ship something and it doesn't work, you just press a button on our website
and
and
it's undone.
it's undone, right?
Great.
And so, some of our customers just use us for that sort of insurance level, right? Is that they want an undo button, right? Or they want to know that, most of the time they never use us, but once a year something breaks. Because just like, it's like carrying an umbrella, right? Like just sometimes there's weather, right? And so we're that umbrella.
Okay, so I can do regular releases to keep their teams doing their review, everything good, but I have Shorebird just in case something goes wrong. Push a button and fixed. Well, rollback, I guess.
Yeah, we have a lot of
Okay,
customers who work just like that.
good. And what limitations does this code push have, for example, in terms of performance? Does it have some kind of penalty or?
So in terms of limitations, the biggest one that folks hit is that we cannot update native code. And that's a prohibition from the stores. So for example, we can't update Kotlin code, we can't update Swift code. It's just called out specifically in the agreements you sign that you can't update those kinds of code. But again, we can update any part of your app that's written in Dart. In terms of performance, in general, there's no performance penalty. You shouldn't ever notice that we're there, period, whether from a release or from a patch. There have been occasional performance issues on the iOS side. We have a much more complicated setup there. But I'm actually this week working on finally finishing the last of those. And we track those very closely. We track reports from customers if they've ever had any sort of performance disturbance, either on a platform, and we work with them to resolve it. But again, there's never been any performance problems on Android. There are never any performance problems when you release. But once you patch with iOS, there have been occasional reports of performance problems, which I'm resolving, since you asked specifically about performance.
Okay, yeah, I don't know what's. All Flutter developers have problems with iOS and Xcode for some reason. I have my own too. Okay, and so the performance is the same. I do a regular release. I
Correct.
use code push to do a. Okay, good.
Everything's the same. You use your same normal development tools. So like you don't use Shorebird at all during development. It's just
Mm,
Flutter. It's
mm,
only that Shorebird just sits on your CI and takes your normal Flutter app and just Shorebirdizes it just a little bit, right? Just adds that update capability right as it's about to go out the door. But otherwise, Shorebird doesn't touch your flow at all.
good. I have to keep in mind that if I update my native code or I update some plugin, maybe this requires a regular release, right?
Correct. Well, you don't have to remember that. Our tools will tell you. So,
Okay,
for
it's
example,
going
if you were
to
to
raise an error. Good.
correct, if you were to do a Shorebird patch, we will detect that there's native changes, and we will tell you, hey, there's native changes. We can't patch those. You could send this out to your users, but you risk that it could be in a confused state, right, where you have one version of the Dart code and a different version of the
Yeah,
native code. But
yeah.
you can also test that before you go. So, for example, we have this whole staging system where when you send out a patch, you don't have to send it to all your users. You can just send it to yourself, right? And you can just test in the staging environment and try that patch and see, is it working as I expected? Did it solve the bug that I want? You send it to your
Mm,
QA team, for example, and
yeah.
then when your QA team says, okay, we're good to go, then you release it to all your users.
Okay, so you have a staging environment, production
Correct.
environment. There is more environments. Is this
Yeah, we have this
configurable in
concept
some way?
we have the concept of channels, similar to what the Play Store offers.
Mm,
They're separate from the Play Stores, but so you can opt any app in the wild into a given channel, and you can do that from your own APIs. So some we've seen customers who like hide a little debug menu in their live production app, and then they opted into the Shorebird beta channel, and then they try the beta patches that way. Or we also provide tools for you to build your app that way, or we provide tools for example, sort of funny things that have come out of our system. We provide a tool called Shorebird Preview, which allows you to go through all of the releases you've ever made with us and slurp one down and put it on your device. We maintain a
mm,
catalog of your devices with a sort of an easy install tool for that. And we've seen teams who really like that for their QA environment, for example, where they
mm.
can pull up last Tuesday's build, with just a single click, or they can pull up, 3 months ago's Tuesday's build and
I
compare.
see. I see. So another use case will be for within the company, right? For some teams and the some, yeah, nice. And let's talk about Flutter itself, building a company on top of Flutter. How does this scare you in some way? What do you think about Flutter? Do you think it's growing? What do you think of this general state of Flutter in the development world?
Yeah, so I believe Flutter is still growing. I no longer lead the team at Google, so I no longer see access to Google's analytics on this.
Mm,
My understanding is that there are more than 1 million monthly Flutter developers. One of the things that I see in particular is that a lot of Flutter is growing in the US, which has historically not been the case. Flutter took off like wildfire in China, like 5 or more years ago, in India, in some parts of Africa, Brazil, in Europe. But it was really slow to grow in the US, and that is finally changing. We're seeing a lot more growth from larger, more established US-based companies. So Flutter, from my vantage point, seems like it's growing. I've been asked since, as I said, I led the team for a long time. I've been asked for 10 years, is Google going to kill Flutter, or is Flutter dying? And,
Yeah.
it has outlasted many other competitive frameworks have come and gone in the time that Flutter has been around.
Well, I mean, Google has a track record that it's scary. I guess I think it's normal that people ask themselves this.
Oh, totally. I mean, this is one of the problems that I'm seeking to solve with Shorebird, right? So I left Google. I decided I wasn't done trying to solve this problem. I've been trying to solve this problem for almost 2 decades now, right? I just want the world to stop writing everything twice. I thought the web was going to get us there. I worked on the web for a very long time. I worked on Safari. I worked on Chrome. I led parts of WebKit, etc. But it just was insufficient. There's too much baggage in the web. And so it turned out, needed a new tech stack that is web-based. Like, we started from Chrome code and we stripped it down. But we needed a new tech stack in order to provide the quality that Google wanted with portability to all the screens Google wanted to go to. And one of the things that, was very intentional in the very early days of Flutter was that some of our earliest customers were just tiny, tiny boxes. Like, for example, Fiber was one of our very first customers of Flutter. Fiber is this system that was only in the US ever, where Google was trying to do, sort of rural internet. And they had these set-top boxes like you might get from your cable provider. And so we ran Flutter on those set-top boxes. They were moving to Flutter before they were canceled, before the project as a whole was canceled. So it just was this general idea of, hey, we want portable code, we want quality, and we needed to go all these places, even ones where the web can't fit.
Okay.
So,
And talking about US companies and Flutter, why do you think this happened? Why at the beginning it was not working well within the US and now it does?
I think it's a question of age. I think that the U.S. market, obviously there's lots of, startup innovation here out in Silicon Valley where I live, but there's just a lot of big old companies that are slower to adopt technology. And, there's this famous book called Crossing the Chasm that talks about the stages of technology adoption. Do you have it in your bookshelf? Oh, I see.
Never heard of it.
Oh, you were reaching for something and I wondered. In any case, there's this famous book called Crossing the Chasm, which talks about sort of the chasm between sort of your early adopter set and the broad applicability of your product. And it shows this adoption curve. Anyways, I think that Flutter has crossed the chasm a very long time ago in that book's parlance, but it has been in this like early majority phase for a long time. And I think it's beginning to transition into like a later majority where people are adopting Flutter not because it's Flutter, not because it's sexy, not because it's interesting or cool or new, but just because it saves them a ton of money, right? Or it's the low risk thing to do, not the high risk thing to do. And I think we're seeing it penetrate into these larger businesses as a result. I mean, when we were helping teams inside Google roll out Flutter or adopt Flutter, we would have these very large teams sometimes, tens if not hundreds of engineers, come back to us and say, this thing made us 3 times as productive, right? That is a lot of money.
Not twice, right? 3 times.
3 times. And we can talk about why that is, but like, if you're a CTO of some large corporation and, why would you not want to adopt a thing that allowed you to solve all your screens, right? I was at Google Cloud Next last week and somebody showed me a demo or a picture of a demo of sorry, it wasn't a demo. It was like in production. They were saying how we use this technology for all of our pizza ovens. It was a guy from Little Caesars, right? Like that's a pretty boring use case, right? We've seen Flutter on, no offense, but like there are lots of boring places where screens are, right? And you shouldn't have to pull out a new weird tech stack. You should get to use the same tech stack that your mobile developers use, the same tech stack that your desktop developers use, right? And we see power from that. We see that we talked to Toyota, right? So Toyota, has said publicly about how one of the things they like about their Flutter adoption is how when one of their iOS engineers is out for vacation, one of their car engineers can fix the iOS bug because it's all the same tech stack, right? So I think that, again, it's no longer, ooh, that's a hot, sexy thing from Google, and more just, wow, that makes a lot of business sense. And we're starting to see that roll out in some of those older sections of the US.
Mm-hmm. I see. And I heard about LG also trying to hack Flutter to make it work on their TVs, which is another interesting use case, I guess.
Yeah, I think they've gone significantly further than just hacking Flutter. Like, I believe that they're rolling it out. Certainly, we've had a bunch of TV-style use cases. Flutter is used all over the world in all sorts of kiosks. Google used it for all of its smart screen displays that you see. It's used all sorts of IoT kind of things, as well, obviously, of course, as the very popular usages on iOS and Android.
Mm-hmm.
Google recently... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. No, go ahead, please.
Google recently released a stat in one of their blog posts where they talked about how, I think it was 28% of app submissions to the iOS store.
Yeah.
I may not be getting that exact stat right.
Something like that, yes.
Some large number, right? And that's about what we saw for Play as well.
It's a crazy number. Yeah.
I mean, it makes sense, though. It's like, yeah, again, I've been on this journey a long time. It's not Flutter particular that draws me here. It's the fact that this is the right approach. This is the approach that games figured out in the 90s, right? I don't know if you remember, games in the 90s, but it used to be that a game would get written for Sega or Nintendo or whatever, right? And then a year later, a different company, a literally different company, different team would port that game to another platform, right? And that's where we are still in the app world.
Yeah, right.
But games figured out a long time ago. Unity just completely took over the gaming market, as a fluid way of doing this, right? You just write to Unity and then it just magically works on all the gaming platforms you care about. We're just Unity for apps. That's all Flutter is.
That's an easy way to explain somebody what Flutter is. Yeah, I agree. So, doesn't seem like Google is going to kill Flutter anytime soon, right?
I mean, that's it would be Kremlinology for me to imagine what's going on in Google.
It would be the end of the world for all of us, I think.
But I can't see that happening, right? All of Google, well, not all, but almost all of Google's money flows through Dart. So the Google Ads platform.
What do you mean?
The Google Ads platform, the thing that Google sells ads with.
Mm-hmm.
That's all Dart. All of the app that you go to when you go to ads.google.com, and you as a buyer, you deal with, I want to buy these ads in this location or whatever. That's all Dart.
The website?
The website, yeah. It's all Angular Dart. And there are, I don't know if it's still thousands, but there are hundreds of engineers who work on that every day. And there are billions and billions of dollars that flow through that. And so, maybe they've rewritten it since I left. I doubt it, right? An app like that takes years to rewrite. And so I think until that app is rewritten off of Dart, how would you kill Dart, right? And then that's not even mentioning the hundreds of engineers at Google who use Flutter for apps, right? Earth, Classroom, GPay. I don't even have the whole list anymore, but you can go to flutter.dev/showcase and see some of it, right? I think the Play console is even written in Flutter or parts of it. It's like if Flutter is just used all over the place. And again, can you imagine that conversation with your boss and saying, you know what, you need to give me 2 times as many people, and then we're going to take 6 months and rewrite, and then we're going to have separate bugs, different bugs on iOS and Android. It's just like once you've moved to a portable code world, why would you ever move away?
Yeah, right. It will be a disaster, obviously. Let's imagine worst case scenario. Okay, doesn't seem that's going to happen, but let's imagine Google kills Flutter. Do you think that the community will be able to handle this project with all of its complexities?
I mean, if Google was trying to kill Flutter, first of all, they should give me a call. But secondly, if they did it without talking to me, I would just stand up the team. I would just call them all up and say, hey, you want a job? Right? Like, Shorebird is not yet to the size where we could comfortably take on, maintaining all of Flutter by ourselves. But that's where this ends up, right? And you see this in other open source communities where, obviously part of open source is the community. Part of open source is the code, is the technology, but a lot of it is also just the business. Like, how does this thing make economic sense in the capitalist society that we live in, right? And that's the problem I'm so focused on right now, is about aligning the economic incentives around Flutter. Flutter generates many billions of dollars of value
Hmm.
throughout the world every year, right? And it's all about, how do we align business incentives so there exists a company who makes money when you make money, right? Or who gets value when you get value, right? And that's what we're trying to do with Shorebird. And CodePush is our first, foray into that, but we're going to launch lots of products. And like Red Hat or Unity or, Confluent or all of these other open source based companies before us, we hopefully eventually will get to the size where we are the primary maintainers of Flutter, or we will be
Hmm.
if that's necessary. I hope that Google will continue to be the amazing stewards that they have been of Flutter for a very, very long time.
Yeah.
But if they're not, that's why I'm here.
Okay. Nice. And lots of products you could talk about them. They're not ready yet to be.
I mean, we don't have a lot of secrets. We're entirely an open source company. Like, you can go sit in our Discord and listen to our company chatter. Um, we are currently focused on just handling the scaling of CodePush. We see a lot of adoption of CodePush every day, every month, and we had to do a whole bunch of infrastructure work on our cloud this last month to deal with that. We are just still working on onboarding a whole bunch of big customers. So we're currently focused on CodePush, but I do expect that we will launch at least one more product within this calendar year.
Great.
What exactly that will be, I don't know. If you or your listeners have problems that they would like solved,
Yeah.
in the development Flutter space, let me know. I'd love to solve them.
Put them down in the comments. And regarding the recent news about the development team of Flutter at Google, I think they let go part of the team. They also let go part of other teams, but Flutter team was affected, I think. And also, I think they asked the community to take care of some plugins. Did you heard about this? What do you think about that?
So I don't remember the exact dates on this, but I know that Google has been having rolling layoffs for a while.
Mm.
Google was almost 200,000 people when I left, and I'm sure they're well over 100,000, but I know that they've downsized some intentionally. As part of that, and again, I think this was a couple years ago, possibly back in COVID times, um, Flutter did participate in one of these rolling layoffs and did choose to offshore their infrastructure team, which is the team that maintains their, GitHub Actions, that sorts of things. Um, my understanding from the team, I know there were some tweets and some articles at the time, was that was not ended up being a reduction in headcount, just rather we're not going to pay U.S. prices to solve this problem. We're going to pay somewhere else.
Yeah.
But in general, Flutter is and has been a strong team within Google, and I am sure that the macroeconomic forces that we're all operating under may continue to put pressure to reduce the size of that and other teams. But I'm not worried about the team as a whole going away.
Hmm.
In terms of, asking community maintain packages, I look at that sort of thing as being healthy. One of the things that made a big impression on me early in my career is I was an intern at Apple. So my first job out of college was I was an intern at Apple, and then I converted that into a full-time position. But in that internship program, the execs all came and talked to the interns, and I remember when Steve Jobs, he was still alive, came and talked, his entire talk was on the importance of saying no. He said that it is so important to say no in life in order to make room for the yeses.
Hmm.
It's always easy to say yes to yet another thing. It can be harder to say no. And, that just left a big impression on me. And I think I tried to impress that on the team, right? The teams that I led at Google. And I see them doing that. I can't take credit, but I appreciate that it is important to say no. No, it's not the most important thing for us to maintain this package. It's more important for us to take, we all operate under budgets in this world, right? There's only so much time in the day. There's only so many people. It's more important for us to take these resources and spend them on making Impeller amazing, or making 3D amazing, or making AI amazing, or whatever it is.
Okay, so we maybe should see that as a healthy sign of focusing on more important topics and not as a
My wife's a
critical.
big my wife's a big gardener. I don't know if you do any gardening, but she would tell you that pruning is important, right? And I think that to help the healthy growth of the plant. And people aren't plants, and organizations aren't plants, but I see it somewhat similar. I think that any team that's been around, certainly for 10 years, like Flutter has been, right, always needs good, healthy pruning. Whether that's in terms of personnel turnover or just what people are working on. And so I don't see it as a death blow. I think the sort of the meta point that I would say, and if I was still running the Google team, I would say this to the team, is that I think that since Tim left, Google has been more quiet about Flutter than I think I would like to see. And I
Yes.
think that there is an opportunity to say a lot more because there is so much good going on, in the wider community. And I think that silence, that quiet, makes it so that we end up talking about these little things, like this package changed ownership, or this team moved around. No, let's talk about how, oh my goodness, Flutter's being deployed to another billion devices because of this person's adoption, or wow, look at this cool thing that these people are saving lives, in whatever country with Flutter, right?
Yeah, but
I
it doesn't give you clicks on in the internet, so
well, there's that too.
maybe that's the reason you're saying.
Maybe that's the reason.
Uh, could you tell us about a little bit about the early days of Flutter within Google? What was the original idea, your original vision? What did you want to really accomplish?
So Flutter's the vision, I guess, started at least 5 years before we started Flutter. There was a subset of the Chrome team who believed it was silly that we were writing apps in Java, and that really we could and should be writing all of these mobile experiences in the web. And that resulted in a whole bunch of work. We worked with a whole bunch of Google teams to improve the web in various ways. But one of the things that spun out of that is that some of us sat down and tried to build all of these mobile experiences, like exact perfect replicas of Android apps with web technology. And one of the things we learned from that is we couldn't. You couldn't perfectly match the shadows. You couldn't perfectly match the drawer gestures. You'd have jank here and there. And that was a real eye-opening experience. And it pushed us down this mode of, well, how can we make the web good enough to do that? And fast forward that a few years, what that eventually ended up was a radical experiment where we took Chrome and we just started deleting stuff to see how fast and how small and how simple we could make it. And we deleted stuff for a couple weeks, and we ran the benchmarks, and they were 20 times faster. Very much validating the theory that the web was just burdened by all this cruft, right?
Yeah.
And that was enough to get the attention of the then CEO, Larry, who had a slush fund of money he called Google 2.0, I think. And so Flutter was funded initially out of that fund of money, special projects sort of money. And we went off to the races for a while. And we were still JavaScript and HTML and CSS and stuff at the time. And we pretty quickly deleted CSS still. We were still on JavaScript for a very long time. Eventually there was this break in the team where we had deleted so much stuff that we needed to add something back. And the moment you add something back to this subset of the web, you are no longer on a path to being the web. Or at least you're many years away, right? Standards committees take years, to come together on what exactly that they're going to approve or they're going to recommend, right? And that was a fissure in the team because, some of the original team wanted to work on things that were the web. And so some of them went back, and 3 of us, I think it was, continued. Adam, myself, and Ian. No, Raph was still with us then as well. But then we lost a couple more when we transitioned to Dart a few months later. That transition was simply because we had written so much JavaScript that when we tried to run it on iOS, it took 12 seconds to start up.
It's always iOS. I don't know why.
It's always iOS, man.
What happens? I see.
So,
And any very difficult moment that you remember, that any difficulty, anything that you want to tell us about the development?
There were lots of difficult parts, as is, in bringing anything into being. I think losing half the team was a big difficult part. Losing more when we went to Dart. Just trying to get those first customers and solve problems. We rewrote the framework 3 times in JavaScript, and then rewrote it multiple times in Dart as well. I think we didn't have a plan, and it's not because we weren't. You just can't anticipate these things. We were just simply trying to solve a problem of how do we have high quality, portable software development, right? That was the thing that was missing, is that at that time, and it still is somewhat a case today, at least if you exclude Flutter, is you have to make a choice between, am I going to have quality and write twice, right? Or am I going to have, portability, right? And so Flutter, what we were trying to solve is exactly that, is to get rid of that false dichotomy and say, no, just like the gaming world has figured out, you can write a really amazing app and then separately worry about, this is the file open API and we'll plug it in here, or this is the show the keyboard API and we'll plug it in there, right? We'll separate those concerns.
Good. And talking about Dart, and the team don't like in Dart, why there is so much hate on Dart on the web? I don't get it. I think it's a great language, very easy to use. I don't know.
I think Dart got a terrible introduction to the world via this leaked white paper where a maximalist position was expressed about how Dart needed to take over JavaScript, blah, 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 blah. But I don't know. Maybe it's like you said earlier. It's maybe grumbling is what gets clicks.
Yeah. For me, it's way better than JavaScript, for instance. But anyway, and talking about the future, what do you think about Flutter? How do you think it's going to evolve in the coming years in the world?
So I think the part that I think the most about is the business side of Flutter, is about growing the ecosystem of Flutter-related businesses, not just Shorebird. I'm here to promote, ServerPod or Code Magic, or all of these folks who are like trying to build product companies, within Flutter. I think that's really important for the health of the system. In terms of like where the tech is going, I think there's finishing Impeller, right? Like Impeller is a super powerful piece of technology, and just like getting it everywhere is big. I think Flutter is currently sort of figuring out what it means to exist inside a company that's a bit focused on AI, and what does that mean about the team, and maybe a bit of a distraction for the team at times. But I think that there's going to be more platforms for Flutter. Like I know that I've seen a lot of interest from the Harmony folks on bringing a really good quality Flutter port there. I think that there's going to be more just than that. I think that we're going to continue to see the OS and mobile ecosystems evolve and more screens come to be, and that's really good for Flutter. I don't think even if you don't call it Flutter, like who cares about the name, right? Like just the general approach of we want to have an entire portable platform. Not one that just papers a little bit over the local buttons and widgets, but one that brings in its entire stack, just like browsers do, just like game engines do. That approach is the right approach. It's a very expensive approach to take. And so far, Flutter's the only big one out there. And so I think just continuing to figure out what does it mean? How do we adapt that to more places? How do we help more people adopt? How do we help pave the way for all these use cases that don't look exactly like the use cases that Google has, right? This is part of Shorebird's mission, right? Is that Google just uses Flutter in a very different way than all of the rest of the world does. Because they have this giant monorepo. They have this giant unified build system. They have this synthetic file system for doing generated files. They don't use JSON. They use protobufs. All these things that you think of as normal to your Flutter development, Google doesn't even use. And so that's part of the mission of Shorebird is what if we had a strong economic entity aligned with your exact usage paths?
Mm-hmm.
Who cared a lot that, build runner or whatever, the solution for JSON was amazing, right? Or cared a lot about your monorepo setup that doesn't happen to use Google's weird build system, right? What would that be like? And so those are the kinds of things that I'm solving. I think it's fun and interesting to see, again, just the continued diversity and expansion of the community, even though I have much less visibility into that than I used to.
Okay. And regarding Impeller, what are your thoughts? Do you think it's a good way to advance? It's going to bring real value? I mean, it does certainly in certain platforms.
I think Impeller is in the end inevitable. And again, we ignore the name and whatever. What Impeller is saying, hey, what is the minimum graphics pipeline needed to do high quality portable apps? Skia is great and amazing, but it is not designed for apps. Skia is designed for a browser. So Flutter went through this in our transition from JavaScript to Dart, and Impeller is the same thing. So the transition from JavaScript to Dart was about transitioning from just-in-time compilation or interpretation on iOS, but just-in-time compilation, so on-device compilation, to ahead-of-time compilation. Skia is designed for browsers where you go to a different screen every couple seconds or minutes or whatever. It's going to have different graphics on it, and it's going to have to compile different shaders and figure out what you need, right? That's not how Swift, and their graphic system work, for example. When you compile with Swift UI, they pre-compile the 5 shaders or whatever they're going to need for your app into your app. That's exactly what Impeller does. Impeller is mostly about, hey, what if we, again, like we did with Flutter, what if we deleted all the stuff we weren't using and moved to an ahead-of-time compiled system? It's just the right system for apps. But like Flutter, it was a very expensive thing. And it's my fault that Impeller is here as late in Flutter's evolution as it was. I was presented options, what is this now, 6 years ago, of, solutions for how we can solve jank. And I was offered a short-term solution, a medium, like a small cost solution, a medium cost solution, and a large cost solution. And I picked the medium, and I was wrong. Because the large cost solution was Impeller. They presented me Impeller, 6 years ago or something like that. And I said no at the time. But it's the right solution. I was wrong then, and they later convinced me that they were right. And the solution is simply to, again, start with what is the minimum amount that apps need, and let's do everything ahead of time. That's it.
Great.
And so you're going to see it on all the platforms. It's going to eventually make it everywhere. Maybe not the web. I don't know exactly about what Impeller on the web is going to be, because Flutter on the web is a very funny story because we don't have direct platform access on the web. But
Yeah, it's totally different, I guess, right? From the
it's a
backend
totally
side.
different beast.
Yeah. And which advice would you give to someone very new to Flutter development? How should they start? What should they do?
Yeah, I think my advice for Flutter development is very generic. I don't think of myself as a Flutter developer. I don't think of myself as a C++ developer. I think of myself as someone who solves problems and uses computers to figure that out. I think the advice that I would give to someone starting out is to play. And to play a lot in different ways, to try different things. And whether that's different technology stacks or different apps. But if you look at my GitHub, I have hundreds of unfinished repositories. I'm constantly coming up with some new, like some little indie game I'm playing. I decide, hey, I want to write a little simulator for the indie game, right? Or, oh, what's this weird technology? What if I wrote a thing to play with that technology, right? That's the way I learn. I think that's the way that most humans learn. It's the way that I watch kids learn. And I think that we too often forget that as adults. So I would tell you that if you're just starting out with Flutter, or you're just starting out with development, this is a long game. You're going to be around the tech sector for a long time. And I would encourage you to just play and find
Okay.
things you enjoy.
So, if I have a lot of unfinished projects, does this mean that I'm a good developer?
I hope so.
Okay, then I'm happy. All right, and to wrap up, could you tell us any news regarding Shorebird? Anything that you want to share in the short term? Any ideas you have or goals you have in mind?
Yeah, I think that the biggest news for us is just one of sort of maybe boring stability, right? Like Shorebird has this really long development arc, and we're finally over all that hump. I think it took us a year and a half really to have a stable iOS product. It ended up being way harder than I thought. But now it is. And, thousands of businesses use us every month to ship to tens of millions of devices. And, we're out there, we're stable. Our biggest problem by far is that people don't know we exist. There's over 1 million monthly Flutter active developers, and I would guess that 100,000 have heard of us. And, that's just a reaction to how fragmented the media ecosystem is, these days. I don't know how you get your message out. You come and talk to folks like yourself or,
Yeah.
100 others. But I think the biggest thing that we're focused on right now is simply awareness. Because customers, when they try us, they love us. And they use us for, again, all different things, right? Whether it's just simply insurance, I just want to integrate Shorebird and know that I have it if I ever need it, to, the startup down the street who's shipping 12 times a day, and everything in between. And so, we are going to do another product. We're going to hopefully start that as soon as we can catch up with the scaling. Maybe we're going to be in the scaling mode for another year, which is, great for business. But as soon as we can get our heads above water, scaling wise, we are going to launch another product because we are trying to be the Flutter company. And even if you don't care at all about code push, we are here to support you as a Flutter developer, and we would love to hear about your problems and solve your problems.
Great, great. I think that stability is very, very important. So easy to jump on the train of new features and forgetting about things working, really working. I think it's a great, great way to advance. And finally, where can people follow you, find you, see more about you?
Well, I personally am very easy to find on the internet. It's just Eric Seidel. I'm not the poker player, but I'm very easy to find on the internet. But the in terms of Shorebird, it's shorebird.dev, like the little birds that skitter along the beach. You can also go to Discord, discord.gg/Shorebird. Gives you a direct invite to our server where we run our company in the public. You can hang out with, whatever it is, 5,000 of your closest Flutter friends there. And yeah, we're on Twitter and X and Blue Sky and YouTube and LinkedIn and all the various social places that people get news these days.
Great. Also, you have the links on the video description, so you can find them very easily.
Oh,
So
one last thing.
yeah,
We
sure.
will be at FlutterCon.
Oh,
So both the US version and the EU version, we are very busy, so we don't get to go to a lot of conferences. But
mm,
we will be both at the New York FlutterCon, which you can still buy tickets for, as well as the EU FlutterCon, which is coming up in September.
great. Good to know. Great. So Eric, thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much to coming to my channel. And yeah, thank you. It's been a pleasure to talk with you.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks. Bye. I hope you enjoyed this interview with Eric. If you want to learn more about Shorebird, you have several useful links in the video description. If you like this interview format, let me know in the comments. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more Flutter related content. Thanks for watching this video until then. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Goodbye.